Welcome to UFO Paradigm. UFO Paradigm is based out of Sydney and Melbourne with Irene in Melbourne and myself in Sydney, Julien and tonight we have three guests that Irene will introduce, but really the subject, I guess the motivation around this discussion tonight is for those who haven't heard about these revelations, and I guess it's more for the general public. Recently, an American former intelligence official publicly claimed, based on testimony, that the US federal government maintains a very highly secretive UFO recovery program, and that has in its possession non-human spacecrafts and non-human bodies. So that's something that's very explosive in the UFO community that has been researched for many, many years, but that's something that I guess everyone tonight wish that we would discuss a little bit more in the public arena. And I guess that's the discussion tonight, and that's the purpose, is to share what's happening these days in UFO research. So Irene, if you want to introduce everyone.
Okay, we have Ross Coulthart, Franc Milburn, and Christopher Sharp. I think you guys can say a little bit about yourselves and share a bit of your history to our listeners, viewers. Oh, shall we start with Christopher?
Hi there, Irene and Julien. Thank you very much for having me. So my name is Christopher Sharp, and I am the editor-in-chief and founder of the Liberation Times, which is an online publication reporting on the UAP topic. And our stance is that we report this story as a scandal. So if you're going to report it as a scandal, you basically listen to the whistleblowers. So that's how I go about reporting it. I also write for the Daily Mail as well. And so I'm basically constantly writing news stories about the inner workings of the US government and how it sees the issues, and from a congressional perspective as well. And I'm also broadening out internationally as well. So I'm reporting on Canada and its recent stance on the UAP. Hopefully there's going to be more from Australia to come soon as well. And may I mention as well, it's such an honor to appear with Ross, who is an absolute legend. When I was merely an unknown small journalist, Ross, came to me and he helped me, and he sang my praises. So it means a lot to me, to have Ross here. And also Franc as well. I don't know where Franc's gone, but Franc is. I spoke to Franc for a very long time, but Franc is, he's not only a war hero and legend, but he's a highly intelligent human being who has a lot to provide to this debate and discussion, I suppose, on UAP, and a lot of insight to give as well. And I can see him he's already played such an important role, and he's really helped me, and he's given me the confidence as well to have such a smart kind of person who has insight into this topic in the intelligence world and stuff to praise me for my work. It certainly gave me a boost at the time. So thank you, Franc. Thank you for all your help.
So Franc, can you tell us a little bit about yourself too?
As in what I do in private? No.
brief background, couple of minutes.
I joined the army from school, did time in defense intelligence, and have worked as a consultant in various roles since then, mainly oil and gas, and advising a range of sort of FTSE 100 and Fortune 500 clients in investigations and security, both sort of strategic and on the ground. And I'm at the SCU.
And Scientific Coalition of UAP Studies. Correct?
That's the one, yeah. So just to plug them quickly, they've got a conference coming up at the end of the month. I think it's about $65, and it's well worth going to. It'll be 2 days.
Thank you.
I've got a first question, I guess. I would like Ross to introduce yourself for those who don't know you out there, and why. The first question is why you are interested now in the UFO phenomenon after so many years or decades in journalism. Thank you.
Hi, hello, everybody. I'm Ross Coulthart. I'm a journalist who does long-form investigative journalism. I've worked for a variety of Australian TV networks and newspapers, and I've taken an interest in UFOs, UAPs, as we call them, unidentified anomalous phenomena or aerial phenomena, because it's been one of the most stigmatized and tabooed subjects in the entire media for much of my career. And we're all told that you don't do UFO stories, but I think it's a verdant pasture for fascinating areas of investigation, because whilst the public have been told it's a subject to be ridiculed and stigmatized and generally laughed at, the reality is that, especially over the last 5 or 6 years, the US government has begrudgingly been dragged into an admission that it's real, and that whilst we don't know all the answers yet publicly, the US has formally confirmed, both in reports to Congress and in key interviews with key personnel, that there is a reality which they cannot explain. Anomalous, apparently intelligently controlled objects doing weird things that are described quite usefully by the so-called 5 observables. They're capable of incredible velocities, often tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of kilometers an hour. They can do instantaneous velocity. They can do transmedium travel. They're capable of stealth, and possibly the most interesting of all, they have the capacity for positive lift in a way that we cannot explain. There's no visible means of propulsion. There's no rocket motors. There's no emissions suggesting heat. And as both of my colleagues, Christopher and Frank, have explained for a lot of the articles that they've written, it's an ongoing and enduring mystery worthy of intense investigation. So that's why I'm investigating it.
Thank you, Ross. Irene, you've got a question, I think.
Ross, you had a lot to say about the recent article in The Australian by Jack the Insider. Why do you think that the Australian and the British are quite slow in the media to pick up this story? It seems like the oldest question in time on Earth is slowly being answered, but I'm quite unimpressed with not seeing this break on the ABC, for instance.
I think, as Frank and Chris would explain from their perspectives, it's an issue simply and practically because the media, the legacy media of newspapers and network television, it ain't what it used to be. Basically, they're all in serious decline. The capacity to fund long-form investigative journalism and give journalists the opportunity to do the kind of digging that I've enjoyed in my career is very, very remote and very, very rare. And the work that, say, Frank did with his groundbreaking reports with an Israeli military intelligence think tank, and the work that Chris continues to do with his Liberation Times research is phenomenal. And that's all being done outside of the legacy media. And I think what's slowly happening is there's a catch-up happening. I think people are slowly beginning to realize in legacy media that there is a story unfolding. And I don't know whether my colleagues would agree with me about this, but I think one of the great turning points has just come in the last week where, as a result of an interview that I was involved with a guy called David Grush, who was an intelligence insider who came forward and gave astonishing allegations of crash retrievals of UFO craft and retrievals of bodies and a systemic cover-up inside the US and defense intelligence community. What I think was a major turning point just in the last week was a bipartisan initiative by the Congress to essentially push for new legislation, which is really going to hold private aerospace companies' feet to the fire on whether or not they're hiding retrieved non-human technology.
I was about to ask Ross, and you basically...
Sorry, can you guys ask somebody else some questions? Because seriously,
sure,
I'm not going to do an interview all night.
Christopher, I was about to ask Christopher, if you could, Christopher, recap what happened in the last 4 weeks or 6 weeks in terms of the Dave Grudge revelations, and how much do you think the general public has understood, has been informed and understood the implications? So that was my next question. So thank you, Ross.
No worries. So, following the fantastic work of of Ross and Leslie Keane on getting this story out. I think, the public has learned a great deal about what may be going on behind the scenes. And remember, these are allegations. However, I would say that Dave Grush has put verifiable information out there, such as locations and names of programs. So this is why I always put out there, don't say, oh, I don't believe him, or don't say I believe him. Just say, look, okay, cool. He's put out, verifiable information. Let's keep an open mind, and let's push the Congress and the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office to verify these claims. That is the logical stance to take towards this. But I come at it from a stance of believing what he says, because I have multiple sources have corroborated what he had said, and these sources have always provided me correct information, hence why I was able to break the story about the NASA UAP study and the first congressional hearing, which took place in the House last I think it was last year now. So yeah, I really do believe this. And what's happened, it started a chain reaction, I would say, within the Congress. And that's largely due to News Nation and its congressional contacts, and basically people just going up to congressional people such as senators and representatives, basically saying, asking what their reaction is. So I think it's moved the conversation along, because you've got a lot of congressmen who have basically said that, look, this is really interesting, let's have a look at it. Or even Marco Rubio, who's basically said that he's heard these kind of claims before and that we should take them seriously. So we've got some real heavyweights now actually wanting to look further into this. And, since those revelations did come out, I feel that we've got positive momentum within the House and the Senate, at least. Unfortunately, that has not been the case to the media. There's been some very, very brave outlets that have actually reported it, but the mainstream media, like say CNN, the New York Times, Washington Post, they've been cowards about this. They've been absolutely cowards. I couldn't see those publications, New York Times and Washington Post, actually reacting this way to such a huge story back in the 1970s when they were reporting on stories such as Watergate. And it's really embarrassing, actually, that you've got this stance from media. They do not seem curious at all, which is why more independent media are actually taking the lead on this, be it Ross, News Nation, who are kind of new players when it comes to this, Michael Schellenberger, and others, they're really pushing it here in terms of getting the information out and listening to the sources and investigating the story properly. And I fear that the New York Times and whatnot, they call up the Pentagon. Is there a story here? Pentagon says no. Okay, that's what they report. They don't dig any further. It's really embarrassing to see. But from here, we've got the Intelligence Authorization Act language, which has now come out. So basically, what that does is it gives it gives an out, let's say, for defense contractors to come forward. So basically, they got an amnesty period from the time it's signed into law by President Biden, which I expect to be end of December. So I think it's about 3 months from the top of my head that they've actually got to come forward to the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office and the Congress to basically admit that they've got UAP programs that haven't been reported before. So they've got until then. So the likes of Lockheed, if you're in Lockheed right now, you're kind of like twiddling your thumbs thinking, what am I going to do? Am I going to try and keep this secret if I do have such a program? Or am I going to go out to the public, basically, or to the Congress at least? We don't know if there's a mechanism to get this information to the public. So that's pretty huge. But all I would say, just before I finish, is that, look, Congress, a lot of congressional people have actually tied themselves to this term transparency. Okay, so I think that's really, really important, and we're already hearing good rumors about possible hearings in the House Oversight Committee, where you could get whistleblowers, maybe even Grush himself, testifying publicly about these alleged secretive UAP programs. So this is really big because elected officials, they've now tied themselves to transparency. So I suspect that if they are going to keep their promises to the people, that we'll see more of these hearings, and we'll see an effort by Congress to, as much as possible, push this information into the public sphere.
Hopefully you're right. Irene, I think I had a question for Frank, but please, Irene.
Oh, Frank, I wanted to know your point of view from military analyst experience that you have about the credibility of David Grush. There have been a few debunkers that have laid into him and say that he's not credible. What is your point of view professionally?
My point of view is completely credible. I mean, aside the fact that he's been vetted by, Ross, Leslie Keane, Ralph Blumenthal, then the debrief did their own, basically background check on him. And also as well, just out of the blue, I was talking to an intelligence community, US intelligence community pal of mine. And just out of the blue, he said, "Oh, what do you think about all this Grush stuff?" And he said, "Oh, I've spoken with some GS-15s, and they tell me that he's completely credible." So that was out of the blue to me. So there's no doubt in my mind. And also completely echoes what Eric Davis said, which when he was talking to Alejandro Rojas several years ago, which I quoted in my first paper, when he was talking about the crash retrieval programs and not being able to make advancements. And also as well, the email that I published between Eric Davis and Jack Sarfati, when Eric Davis was suggesting that if Jack Sarfati wanted funding for a UAP physics kind of propulsion program, he'd need to go to the DOE and DOD review boards and panels, if I remember exactly correctly. So Grush is really echoing what they say, and he's come out in a much more forthright manner. But I think if we go back in time, let's go back in time to the year 2000. There was a British report, Project Condign, which was UAP in the UK Air Defence region. And this is in black and white. Forget, long before what we've heard from the American government recently, that UAP exists is indisputable, say the Brits, Defence Intelligence 55, credited with the ability to hover, land, take off, accelerate to exceptional velocities and vanish. They can reportedly alter their direction of flight suddenly and clearly can exhibit aerodynamic characteristics well beyond those of any known aircraft or missile, either manned or unmanned. Right, so that's from the year 2000, which was disseminated to the British public under Freedom of Information in 2006. So that's just another little nugget there. Imperfect as that report was, I think in terms of the press, certainly they're being very, very lazy and absent. If you go back to the 1950s and 1960s. Certainly in the United States, when there was a lot more regional papers, there was kind of virulent reporting on UAP, but it seems as consolidation has taken place in America of all the sort of the big kind of news players, that kind of reporting on a kind of town by town or regional basis seems to have fallen by the wayside.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, great. No, that's very interesting. Of course, I've got a question for Ross, if I may.
Yeah, sure. Can I just say how I'm so pleased we got those two guys up to do the scene setter, yes, because Frank and Chris are quiet heroes in my book. They've done a lot of the plotting work to lay the groundwork for people like me to come through and get scoops with people like Dave Grush. And I really want that acknowledged.
Well, that's thanks to Irene's work. Irene, thank you. I've got a couple of questions there for you, Ross. Do you think, and again, imagine the audience is the general public, it's my mum, it's my dad, it's my wife. Do you think there's going to be public hearings anytime soon? And what's the difference between public hearings and debrief, Congress debrief? And then if there is hearings, do you see more media coverage happening? And maybe that's for Christopher. But before that, why since 1999 and the French Comité report, the French, not government, but French presented to the government as a French report on 300 cases in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And the conclusion of the report was that the US government is implicated in the cover-up, and that's not what sane for democracy, that's not sustainable. Why does it take 20 years to get to that point if there's public hearings and more media coverage?
It's amazing to me as a journalist. This is why I called my book In Plain Sight, because a lot of people watching this, let's assume that most of the people watching this are lay people who don't have the background that we've all got. So they're not across the complexity, a large part of our audience. And so there's probably a large part of our audience who are watching this thinking, these people are talking about UFOs. They're talking about, little green men and flying saucers. We laugh at stuff like that. That's rubbish. It's to be trivialized and stigmatized. It's not something to be taken seriously. And one of the reasons why I was really keen to get Chris and Frank to lay the groundwork is because they, probably more than any other people in the field of UAP research in the last few years, have done the groundwork to basically show the public that there is a long history of cover-up, and that essentially there is evidence that is there in plain sight for anyone to see if you do the homework. And so firstly, I'll answer your first question, which is yes, there are going to be hearings. There have already been hearings, of course. There have been secret hearings, as Senator Marco Rubio admitted in a major interview that he did with News Nation, a news network in the US, on the 24th of June. He admitted that there have been 2 years of hearings to date where witnesses have come forward with first-hand evidence. Some of these people, very senior people in the US government, and they've come forward with first-hand evidence, and they are the people with top security classifications who have testified, as has Mr. Grush, also in secret, to the existence of a crash retrieval and reverse engineering program involving recovered non-human technology. This is a fact. It's not something that's in dispute anymore. There are so many data points now to show that this is a reality. And that's really important for the layperson to understand, because frankly, I don't think still to this day, most of the institutions that we trust to tell us these stories, legacy media, politicians, that they're completely unable to come to terms with this subject matter because they're still paralyzed by the stigma and the taboo that has existed for much of the last 60 years. As the informant that I interviewed, David Grush, has told me, and as he's also told the Congress, he discovered as a member of the UAP task force that there had been a systemic, deliberate disinformation operation run against the US people for much of the last 50 or 60 years. And its purpose has been to lie to the American public. Now, the legality of that is extremely dubious because the Church Commission, which was the last major investigation into the intelligence community, it made it illegal for the CIA and other intelligence agencies in the United States to run intelligence operations against the American people. And that's what's been happening. It's the biggest intelligence operation of all. It's a deliberate disinformation operation. And this isn't something that we've made up. This is something that people like Chris and Frank have reported on, that there are documents that show that these intelligence organizations, right back to the Robertson panel in the 1950s, set about to deceive and lie to the American people and indeed to the planet. And why and how has this been kept a secret? Well, there's a multiplicity of reasons. I think the first is, as the implications of Mr. Grush's allegations are slowly making clear, crimes have been committed, serious crimes. He alleges that people have been murdered to keep this secret. He also alleges that there's been extreme illegalities with the use of government funding. And that's what the Congress is now investigating. I think the second reason, and this is where Frank's expertise will come in particularly, is I think there's a secret effort underway, as Mr. Grush has alleged, of attempting to reverse engineer technology. And I think the United States, in all likelihood, if Mr. Grush's allegations are true, I think in all likelihood, the United States, believe it or not, has multiple non-human craft. And I suspect other potential foreign adversaries, Russia and China, do as well. And the implications of that are, as Mr. Grush alleges, there is a secret Cold War going on between the main three powers for control of this technology, because whoever controls this technology, whoever learns to master it, will control the next 100 years.
Exactly right. That reminds me of Stanton Friedman and the next 100 years about the US geopolitics. Irene, I think you had a question for Franc, right?
Actually, I did have another question for Ross. I'm sorry, Frank. We'll come to you later. Ross, it has been said to you that they have been here for thousands of years. We've heard this around since, I think, Hal Puthoff, Jacques Vallée have suggested this. Have you heard or been given any evidence of anything that's come up through perhaps an archaeological dig that may be thousands of years old?
Oh, look, I haven't been given any specific evidence, Irene, and indeed the evidence that I do have is the evidence of witnesses and sources who've spoken to me confidentially, largely from within the intelligence or the scientific community in America. But I mean, generally, without giving away secrets, what I can tell you is that a number of them have pointed to the fact that there are ruins of ancient civilizations that display technological mastery that is far beyond the stated age of those objects. A lot of the objects, for example, in the Cairo Museum that have been retrieved from some of the great archaeological discoveries in ancient Egypt, some as long ago as 5,500 years, which are, pre-dynastic Egyptian relics. They display a technology and a mastery of technology involving the shaping of stone, which is far beyond the technology, the known technology of that era. And it's interesting. I think a lot of people, if they actually bothered to look, would be able to actually inform themselves about the existence of files in the CIA library that show that America's premier intelligence service has spent a lot of time investigating ancient civilizations. Why is the premier intelligence agency in the United States devoting a considerable amount of time and money in the last 50 or 60 years to investigating ancient civilizations? And why has it secretly backed archaeological digs in different parts of the world? What does it know that we don't know? I mean, these are things that are facts. They're not things that are speculation. There are inquiries going on all over the world that I think are kind of out of the mainstream, but if you bother to stop and look, it's legitimate to ask a question. And that's what we're doing. I'm not saying definitively that aliens have been here since time immemorial, but that's what I'm being told by my sources. And I do think it's intriguing that if you look at some of the ancient civilizations, there is stonework, building work that defies explanation. And some of the speculation, of course, is that there are pre-civilizations. One of the things that can't be explained are a lot of artifacts and ruins that seem a lot older than has been able to be explained by modern archaeologists. How were these buildings crafted? Who were the people that crafted these buildings? We still don't know. There are fundamental mysteries in human civilization that we haven't answered. And rather than being scared about it and treating it with stigma and ridicule, I think we should embrace it and accept it and acknowledge it and have fun with it and investigate it.
So Ross, thank you. That's very exciting. The conversation is taking multiple directions, and indeed everyone here and probably the audience, part of the audience, has investigated, a lot of these phenomena. But I want to ask you, anyone here, maybe Frank, Christopher, are we going to expect, or should we expect anything from the American government, from the US President Joe Biden, in terms of, after these hearings, whether they're secret or public, any declaration from the US government, and what could be the implications of that?
I'll go first, and I'll see what Frank thinks of it. So I think what's going to happen is that I have a sense that once the Intelligence Authorization Act passes, if it passes in its current form, I do have a sense that Lockheed Martin may actually come clean to a certain extent about some of these programs. I say that because in 2010, as reported very well by Michael Schellenberger, a major defense contractor actually approached the US military asking if it could come to some new arrangement on the UAP reverse engineering program so that it could be opened up to more people, a greater number of scientists and engineers, so they could all look at this and study it, and so they could make further progress. Because from my understanding, there's very little progress that have been made on these craft. And look, if you're going to get the clearances to actually get on these programs, you've got to be as clean as anything. You couldn't have done drugs. You can't have a blimp in your background, basically. And I don't know if you know this, but many of the top scientists and engineers in the world have regularly done drugs, either in the past or they currently do it, like smoking pot and stuff like that. And that's just a fact. So many of the greatest engineers and scientists under the current arrangement would never get a chance to view these programs. And I think Lockheed understand that if they're going to make progress, they do need to come public to a certain extent. So I think it may actually be in Lockheed Martin's best interest to actually come out about these programs. And this amnesty period may be the opportunity that at least some within the organization have been waiting for a very long time. I will put that out there. It's by no means a certainty, though. But I think that if this is made public to some extent, that there are craft in possession of contractors or the US government, and we do have bodies as part of those craft as well, which Dave Grush has alleged as well, and that's a whole different conversation, by the way, which is could be quite disturbing, I think. But I think if that does occur, I really do think that the president will have to make a move, and I think to some extent the President's National Security Council already understand this is a huge issue. And as Ross reported back in, I think it was February now, wasn't it, Ross? I don't know if you have any further insight, Frank, but apparently a very, very senior person, I think it was an admiral or someone like that, I don't know, but apparently this person approached the President's National Security Council after the February shootdowns, basically coming clean that the US Air Force have not been truthful when it comes to UAP, and that there was a retrieval and reverse engineering program. So I think this may not come as a surprise to the president. I think he probably understands a lot more behind the scenes of what's happening. And I think, one of my favorite presidents of all time was Jack Kennedy, and he wrote a fantastic book before he became president on political courage. And I think that is missing at the moment from many politicians. You have to be courageous. You've got to make the bold decisions. And I really, really do hope that instead of resisting this and staying quiet in this, that, Biden and his administration actually do make some steps towards being transparent when it comes to this.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
Irene.
I just wanted to swing to the topic of scientists. And also Dave Grush did talk about that people's lives were in danger, and there were some things done that are quite illegal and quite horrible to people in the attempt to cover this up. Frank, you have some experience or knowledge of people close to you that have been threatened or worse. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, sure. I can share a bit of it. I just want to quickly add on something to what Ross said about this, the ancient aspect of it. If you remember, if we look back, I mean, I'm old enough, I can remember 1977, there were 2 Voyager probes that just sent into the far reaches of the universe. Okay, so they had silver records aboard, 40 languages, including modern languages, basically saying like, hello, giving greetings. And there was a little image of human beings and a kind of symbols so that so that other civilization could work out where we were as humans. But including in those languages, right? They had ancient language as well. So they had ancient Akkadian, which was spoken in Mesopotamia from 3000 BC to 800 BC. So what's all that about? Ancient Sumerian as well, Hittite, and Aramaic, which is what Jesus used to speak. So you wonder why in 1977 they put those on those records and sent them out to space, unless somebody somewhere else had actually spoken those languages or understood those languages. Because I'm assuming that back in those times, the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Hittites, and Aramaic speakers, they weren't actually broadcasting like radio or television signals into space. So aside from that, yeah, in terms of scientists, yeah, I mean, this is something that's been going on for years. I initially thought it was kind of like UFO lore. But if you look, there's been some very high-profile accidents or deaths. I had a number of scientists approach me over the last couple of years who'd been targeted with directed energy weapons, who'd been harassed. We're talking break-ins, overt surveillance, technical surveillance, really, really nasty stuff, abductions, druggings, intimidation of family members and also wider friends. And we're talking, people who can corroborate each other's stories. But when you have then three different people who don't know each other and they come to you and they're all reporting the same thing in terms of the harassment, being followed around, having brakes tampered with, and asking you for security advice, then and then you put it together and they've all been working on UAP programs or UAP physics or UAP propulsion or free energy, then it kind of strikes you that somebody doesn't want you delving into those topics, whether it's in the black world or the white world.
Yeah, very interesting. I've got another general question. Maybe I think we've got 20 minutes left in that 60-minute format, so I want to keep the discussion broad. It's a very interesting subject indeed. Do you think we've just pushed what we call in the UFO field the red line of UFO disclosure? I know Richard Dolan likes to talk about that, and if that's the case, what else can we get from these public hearings? Because it seems to me that if we start talking about crash retrievals and bodies, we passed that red line of disclosure, and it seems to me that we are entering territories of people are going to start asking questions about where does that funding come from, secret funding and black budgets and etc. and illegal ramifications. So I wanted to ask that question as well, generally speaking, to anyone here about, is that all we're going to get from these public hearings, or do you expect more to come out of that? And then we can enter the territory of, human abductions, because we've talked about abduction just now from what you could call the deep state or any secret agency to sort of cover up the UFO phenomenon. But what about alien abduction? So I guess my question is, everyone in the UFO field seems to be very surprised by where we're at now, but still the general public is not really aware. But what should we expect from these hearings? Are we going to get two more questions down the line, or is that the end of the disclosure? We've got crafts, we have a couple of bodies, and that's it. And of course, there's ramifications, philosophically speaking, and for our society. But what's your view on that, Ross?
Okay. At the moment, we still do not have any official confirmation from anybody in Congress that these allegations made by Mr. Grush are true. And people have quite rightly pointed out, and Mr. Grush has never pretended to be anybody else, he's not a first-hand witness to the existence of these craft or of the existence of a reverse engineering program. What he actually did was probably even better. He went out as a UAP task force investigator and gathered the information, the intelligence from people who are directly involved in that program. And what I'm aware of is that some, if not all of those witnesses have already given evidence in some qualified way, either to the Intelligence Community Inspector General, the ICIG, which caused the referral from the ICIG to the Congress, where he made the finding that David Grush's allegations were credible and urgent. And we also know that some of these witnesses and other witnesses who've got direct knowledge of the legacy program have given evidence directly to the Congress. And one of the reasons why senators and other politicians don't know a lot about this at the moment is because, as is the case in Congress, when you have whistleblowers come forward, the preliminary hearings are done by staffers and they're done by lawyers. And so a lot of the early testimony of these witnesses has already been heard in secret. And so that's why you have extraordinary statements from people like Senator Rubio, who's not a man given to inflammatory statements, where he literally said in a news conference the other day about David Grush, quote, "Either what he's saying is partially true or entirely true, or we have some really smart, educated people with high clearances and very important positions in our government who are crazy and leading us on a goose chase. One of these two things is true. Either what they're telling us is true, or we've got some people in important positions that are doing this for some reasons. So either one is a problem. We've got to figure this out. We can't ignore it." And so he's actually said, even if it's partially true, somebody's broken the law. There's been some violations because these things have got to be disclosed to Congress because Congress has been paying for it and probably for a long time. And so that's what's happening now. This is what I think could possibly be the best that would come out of these hearings, would be secondary witness corroboration from somebody with direct knowledge of the legacy program saying, yes, I corroborate what David Grush is saying. I'm prepared to say it's true. But I'd like to hear from what Frank and Chris think, because both of them have got excellent sources. And I suspect it's going to take a lot longer than the next few weeks because all we've got is the remainder of the July sitting period. At the moment, they're in a July 4th holiday weekend recess. They're coming back and then they're sitting in both houses until the end of July. And then there's the big, long American summer. And so a lot of people in the Senate in particular, which is the section of the Congress that's done the most work, a lot of people are telling me that they think the main stuff's going to happen in September. And it's going to take that long before there starts to be really useful stuff being admitted in any public hearings by anyone in the Congress.
I think, sorry if I could just add in, I think there's going to be some resistance from people actually within Congress and the intelligence committees because their aerospace and defense, effectively clients and sponsors, people who get them elected, are going to be putting pressure on them as well. I noticed there was a story by Dean Johnson, and he was already saying that the majority and the minority member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, they were on Fox News, and they were basically rubbishing the idea of crash retrieval. So you've got resistance even within those intelligence committees themselves that are supposed to be looking at this. And I know what I'd be doing if I were one of these contractors or some dark part of the DOE or the DOD. They've had 8 decades to plan for such an eventuality. What happens if it comes out in the wash? So you'd be looking at things. You'd be looking principally at outsourcing the tech and putting it somewhere else, like maybe in the Falkland Islands, which you can get to via Ascension quite easily from America, and which has got an absolutely huge airbase, which the Brits built there, and loads of space. Or you'd send it somewhere, to some friendly country like Brazil, with which America and contractors have had a long-term relationship with in terms of UAP. I mean, there's plenty of places that the Americans could offsource these materials to, whether it's contractors or government directly. And I'd say, yeah, I mean, in terms of the kind of threshold, talking about, the craft and the bodies, I don't think we've got there yet, because although we've got Grush, we haven't actually got the proof, like the photos, the videos or whatever. We haven't got that yet. And I think the next threshold is definitely going to be like, abductions, all the kind of weird and wonderful stuff that happens at Skinwalker, the disembodied voices, the invisible entities, the evisceration of cattle by invisible entities, the cryptids that can't be stopped by high velocity rounds. The UFOs coming through portals. I think all those things, that's another kind of threshold which needs to be addressed. I don't think that the government wants anybody to know about that, because it's a national security issue, and also they can't explain it.
Completely.
Yeah, I would echo what Frank has said, and also I'd note as well, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, he represents Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So talk about conflict of interest when it comes to this stuff. That's I see that as a really big conflict of interest. I can tell you that it is the intent of the House Oversight Committee to hold a hearing this month before the recess happens. I don't know if they're going to get that done or not, but they're certainly aiming for that. It's a big push though. But otherwise, I think Ross is right. I think we could suspect some hearings in September. And also, I'd note as well, one more thing is that I would say that I think other committees within the House and Senate may get involved as well, from left field. You know, committees that we wouldn't expect to take an interest in this, and that no one's spoken out publicly about this yet. So that may happen as well. But it should be a really interesting time, especially as we get into election season as well.
So I've got a question for maybe Ross. I'm not sure, but I've studied geopolitics, Ross. Where are the French? Why any other government is saying anything about this story at this point in time? Are we waiting for first-hand witnesses and these hearings, or aren't we surprised that maybe the French government or any other government may say anything at this point in time? And then maybe, Aaron, you've got a couple of questions as well to close off the...
Well, I think one thing, Julien, that I think that we should give credit to France for is they've long ago, as you acknowledged, they've long ago admitted that there's a reality with the phenomenon of UAPs. And they've basically commissioned, I think, GEPIN, which is a sort of a semi-governmental organisation that investigates UAPs, doesn't treat it with stigma or ridicule. And they've long acknowledged publicly that there is a genuine mystery. In fact, Monsieur Alain Juliet, who's the former head of intelligence for the DG SA, the French External Intelligence Service, he's spoken publicly to Paris Match, where he's publicly acknowledged that there is a genuine mystery there that is worthy of investigation. And so I think a lot of the non-Five Eyes countries, that is countries that aren't part of the UKUSA agreement, the UK-USA agreement, of which Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the US and the UK are members, they're known as the Five Eyes. I think a lot of the countries outside of that agreement feel cut out of this because I'm told a lot of them know about crash retrievals that have actually happened in some cases, some of their territory. And they've tacitly participated in at least assisting or facilitating the removal of these items. And I think there's the beginnings of some resentment. If this is true, that there are genuinely materials that have been recovered by the US of non-human technology, and if they're being improperly withheld, not only from the knowledge of the American people, but also from the rest of the world, what does it say that in 60 or 70 years we haven't been able to develop these technologies, allegedly, into any kind of working anti-gravitic craft or learn the energy systems or the propulsion systems that might allow us to cease our reliance on fossil fuels? I mean, either way, whatever these technologies are that are represented by this mystery, they're real, whatever they are, and somebody or something is operating technologies that are far beyond our known public science. That's gold. That could revolutionize the planet. We could develop energy systems and propulsion systems that could take us to the stars. And I think that's the really exciting thing. But I think one of the other political concerns that the Five Eyes nations have to bear in mind, and this is more Franc's expertise than mine, but they've got to be very careful that they don't upset their NATO allies that have been participating in a defence alliance for much of the last 80 years. And they've now got good reason to question whether the American government's telling them the full truth. Why has this technology been withheld? Why are they not trusted to share in attempting to scientifically research this technology? I think that's a really important point. The politics of this is something that the American government's going to have to weigh, because sooner or later they're going to have to admit, if Mr. Grush's allegations are correct, that they are in possession of non-human technology. And can I just add to one thing that Chris and Franc said? I've been told by one source that at the moment, of course, we've got the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence has put forward this proposed legislation which would completely focus the Congress's efforts on attempting to recover any non-Earth technology from private aerospace. But I'm now told that as well as the House Armed Services Committee, by the middle of next week, the Senate Armed Services Committee will join the House Armed Services Committee and the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence in as a tripartite group of some of the most powerful committees in Congress, support this legislation. So it's going to support the exact same language, and that this will drop sometime next week. And so
Ross,
you'll
can I
have
just quickly
three.
ask, how sure are you on this?
Pretty sure.
Can I quickly?
Yeah,
Oh wow.
pretty sure.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for
And so you
interrupting. That's
have
amazing.
three
Thank you.
three committees publicly concerned about industry involvement in crash retrievals that are going to back this. And as Chris pointed out, the one committee that is conspicuously not involving itself in this is the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And as Chris has rightly pointed out, that committee is dominated by a representative who comes from the very part of Ohio where the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is located. And that is the mythical Air Force Base where a lot of this technology has historically been stored. So,
Indeed.
I think we have to acknowledge that one of the problems is our political representatives everywhere in the world, but particularly in America, are beholden to their campaign contributors and to their supporters. And in America, congressmen and senators are all beholden to their constituents and their electorate. And unfortunately, the big problem for the House Permanent Select Committee for Intelligence is that it is dominated by people who are beholden to the defense and intelligence industry. But what we've got with the three other committees, the three most powerful oversight committees in Congress, hopefully by the middle of next week, you will have a situation where three of the most powerful oversight committees in Congress are ready to fire a broadside at any defense aerospace company that refuses to reveal its possession of, quote, and this is in proposed legislation in the Congress, a comprehensive list of all non-Earth origin or exotic, unidentified, anomalous phenomena material possessed, and to make it available to the URO director, that is the UAP Investigation Office, for assessment, analysis, and inspection. You've got to ask yourself, what does the Congress know to put something in legislation which stipulates items of non-Earth origin or exotic UAP material? It's just unprecedented to have legislation or proposed legislation like that. And that's why we're at such an important moment in history.
Where does that leave Professor Gary Nolan and the levitating silver spheres that you helped, I think it was with Patrick Jackson, to acquire for him to investigate? What news is there on those?
What I can tell you is that the effort to investigate those spheres has broadened. There's others that have come forward. That's made our life a lot more complicated. And what we've also learned is, without giving away any technical details, the capacity to be able to analyze and understand these spheres requires a particular type of technology which is in the process of being procured. It's expensive and it requires investment support, and that investment support is being sought and obtained. And as I've always promised, a report will be provided in due course. But just for the record, for anyone who's skeptical about those metallic spheres that I featured in a documentary last year, it's now official. Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, if people paid attention, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who's the head of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office in the Pentagon, admitted in a public hearing earlier on this year that one of the issues that is perplexing his office are these anomalous metallic spheres that are being seen all over the world doing, quote, I think it was unusual maneuvers. Now, that's a concession by the body in the Pentagon that's tasked to investigate unidentified anomalous phenomena. It's essentially a blanket admission that there is a mystery there. And so, yes, the metallic spheres are being investigated and they are very interesting. And that's all I can tell you at the moment.
So what do you make of Jackson's theory that they are a protective Earth system that is intercepting outside visitors?
It's a hypothesis and it should be tested, and it will be.
Thank you. That's good news that it's progressing, and look forward to seeing what the result of that is. And yeah, they seem to be all over the earth. They're not just something. This is something that people are asking: is the phenomena? It seems to be focused in America, but my response to that is that the phenomena is global. I think perhaps Frank, you probably can answer that because you've been involved in the phenomena in other parts of the world. Is that right?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I mean, if you look at when Kirkpatrick at Oro, when he was talking about sensors, obviously there was a sensor bias to areas where the Americans were the American military and intelligence were operating in terms of operational environments. But I mean, some of the most incredible stories, have come out of Africa and Asia and other places, and not just in the last few years, but going back, 100 years and more. So I think, and the bias as well on America and Canada and North Africa in general is because, the sort of like the main UFO, the largest UFO organizations, like MUFON are based, in the US and Canada. So you tend to get the impression that more is happening in North America airspace or sea space. But, I think Africa doesn't have, such big, UFO communities like that. But I think if you go to China, then you'll see that there are a lot of people who are very interested in the UFO topic. And there are, civil organizations that monitor it. So you will see, a bias again in China. If you speak Chinese and you look at their reports, there's a lot of people reporting things in China. And again, not just going back 10 years, 15 years or 20 years, but, going back a long way. So I think that's why there's a bias towards, North America. And also, Europe as well, and the UK, because you've got, UFO bodies and a lot of people interested in UAP in those areas.
So we've reached the hour mark, and I really wanted to thank everyone for your time today. Anything else we want to add? And if not, I hope we can hear from you all very soon. If there's public hearings in the United States, that would be great. Any final remarks from Irene?
Now, you're coming to Melbourne, aren't you, Ross? Would you like to say something for us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if anybody wants to attend a speech that I'm giving in Melbourne on the weekend of August the 12th, is that right? Yep. Saturday, August the 12th at the Melbourne Library, is that right?
The Victorian State Theatre, State Library Theatre.
The Victorian State Library Theatre.
So in the city in Melbourne, people, if you are a Melbourneite. So
yeah, it's a beautiful building, by the way. I've been there before. It's a stunning building. Mm-hmm. No, looking forward to it very, very much, and I'm hoping subscriptions are going well.
Thank you. All right.
Frank, did you have any final remark, or Christopher? When any final comment on this 1 hour discussion?
Sorry, I'm still in a state of shock by what Ross just said. I don't know if you guys realise, but that was a huge bomb in terms of these hearings that Ross just just reported on. That's pretty big news. So no, so thank you for having me, guys.
Just to be very clear, Chris, so that I've got this right. I'm told the Senate Armed Services Committee will be sponsoring the exact same language, and that will drop next week publicly. And you've had Gallagher sponsoring the same language on the House side, so you now have 3 committees publicly concerned about industry involvement in crash retrieval. And in the words of my source, that's historic and groundbreaking. You have the most powerful authorization committees in Congress, minus the HPSI, which is the House Permanent Select Committee for Intelligence, sponsoring the exact same language. It's powerful, and it's to make a point. And that's from my source. It's powerful, and it's to make a point. SSCI, SASC, House Armed Services Committee, and in their words, the House Permanent Select Committee for Intelligence should be publicly shamed. Turner is in the bag.
Thank you, Ross.
Thank you, Ross.
Okay. Well,
let's wrap it up.
Hopefully
we'll have you soon again. Talk about the next chapter. Very exciting. But yeah, thank you everyone for tonight. That was a very interesting conversation. I hope you enjoyed. And the audience.
It was good.
Thank you, boss.
Bye-bye. Cheers.